So my name is William Krejci. My latest book came out in September here of 2023, Lost Ghost Stories of Cleveland. A lot of people ask, well, what's a lost ghost story? And in this case, of course, it's from Cleveland or Cuyahoga County. This is a story, paranormal in nature, about a haunting or ghostly report that has not been reported on in over 100 years. So no newspapers, no books, no websites, no magazines. There are a couple small exceptions in there where part of the story was told, but not in this aspect. So I have 31 tales from Cuyahoga County, the earliest dates to around 1840, about a lonesome house on the Commons south of Cleveland that was reported to be haunted, and dating from that era, that makes it Cleveland's first haunted house. All the way up to about 1915 with the old pest house, the infectious disease hospital that overlooked the Cuyahoga River Valley, very close to where present-day Garfield Heights is.
So a lot of authors have researched local ghost stories. A lot of good authors who've done a lot of good research.
Oh, yeah.
Charles Cassidy, James Willis,
Yeah.
Beth Richards and Chuck Gove.
Yes.
And a lot of people do a lot of good work.
They do.
And I know you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the question that motivates you is, what can I add to this
Yes.
story? So seeing as this is a well-researched subject, how did you find a way to add something new?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because and I'm actually friends with all four of them. As far as any, I'm going to look and I'm going to see, is it something that has already been written on by any of them? And in a lot of cases, I won't write on it, with the exception, of course, of Franklin Castle, which I believe all of them have written on. I mean, how can you write about Ohio hauntings without covering the story of the Franklin Castle? But mostly, if it's something that has already been written on, I'm not going to cover it again unless there's something I can bring to the table, like orphanage, for example. Finding out not just a story like orphanage, they said, oh, there's a tombstone close to the river on the site. Nobody could ever verify that. I found out whose it was. It was the Sprunger's daughter, Heligonda. She had died back in Indiana, and when they moved to Vermillion, they had her exhumed and they brought her with. And when Mr. Sprunger, Reverend Sprunger, passed away, he was buried back in Indiana, and his widow had their daughter exhumed and reburied back at the Mennonite cemetery, and she had a new headstone, which means that the one that was left down by the river was her original headstone, brought from Indiana. Also did find out that there was a boy, Charles Lawhead, who was killed at the orphanage. Despite all the claims, no one ever died there. It was a sledding accident. He had sled out into the path of the coal wagon and was crushed to death. So I'm not going to write on something unless I can bring something new to the story, or write on it from a different aspect. Maybe look at the history itself. It's great to write about the hauntings and a little bit of the history of the building that's there. And if I can't add to it, I'm probably not going to write on it.
Now, every story, all of the 31 stories in Lost Ghost Stories, are at least a century old.
Yes.
And generally speaking, the farther back you research, the more difficult it is to find information.
Can be.
So how difficult was it to find episodes for Lost Ghost Stories?
It was, I thought it was going to be more challenging than it was. They kind of fell into my lap on accident. I was searching old paper archives, and I'm going through keywords like haunted, was haunted, and I get a lot of, I was haunted by the memory of her face leaving me as she walked out the door, things like that. I'm like, okay, throw that to the side, it's not a story of a ghost. And then when I'd find one, it was scrutinizing it and finding, has this been written about? And there were a few that I said, oh, rats. Somebody just wrote about it recently. There was a story from the late teens about a ghost dog that showed up in a saloon downtown on St. Clair. And I'm like, oh, this is wild. And
Ghost Dog would also be a great name for a saloon down on.
That would be a great name. Unfortunately, it's like an office building right now, but somebody had just a month earlier wrote about it on a website, so somebody else found it, and it's like, rats! I couldn't believe it, and I'm like, okay, I had to set it to the side. And since the book came out, I found about 5 more in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County that are like specifically in Cleveland, and I'm like, well, I was already at my word count, my maximum count, so I couldn't have put them in anyway. But I am working on a second book So I'll save those for that. And I do talk about a couple of them on one of the tours that I give.
Do you have a favorite story in Lost Ghost Stories?
I really love the story of the Old County Jail is one of my favorites. The story of the house on Leading Avenue just terrified the hell out of me. I mean, reading this it gave me chills, and just trying to picture what this ghost bear dog trailing a cloud of smoke behind it was. Honestly, that scared the hell out of me a bit. But then I also got to wax poetic when I was writing on the Cave of Apparitions, which is
An incredible album title.
the Cave of Apparitions. Yeah.
If you start a band and name it Ghost Dog and name the first album Cave of Apparitions. Actually, please, for our viewers, what is the Cave of Apparitions?
The Cave of Apparitions was located roughly around West 29th and Washington Street, between Washington and Vermont Street. Right now, it was a tunnel that cut into the hillside. Not sure if it was naturally occurring or if Matthias Mack, the original property owner, had built it or modified it, but it was also called the Haunted Archway. So it was a stone archway entrance cut into the hillside. He was a brewer, and he used it as a beer cellar, and that's where he could keep his product cold. This was in the 1850s. This was prior to modern refrigeration. So if you wanted your product to last, keep it cold, it will. When they were destroying the site and demolishing it in 1912, a lot of the neighbors, primarily Irish, were very happy to see it go because it terrified people in the neighborhood. They said kids wouldn't walk past it at night, and those who did so in the daytime would have to bless themselves. Even adults were a little nervous when they crossed past it. They all said that they all saw them when they were children. We all saw them when we were children. We saw the prettiest ghosts flitting about in the setting sunlight, and the little fairies flitting about, and the ghosts that roam within that Cave of Apparitions. It was fantastic. It was sealed up when they were putting in Bulkley Boulevard, and Bulkley Boulevard still exists today. It's the Shoreway. The Shoreway is on top of it, but the entrance was sealed. The cave may very well still exist, and if it does, who knows what is lurking in the darkness, waiting.
I like that. All right. Not to segue, but you were the resident historian in Franklin Castle.
Yeah, that's correct.
For 6 years.
That's correct.
I suspect in those 6 years, you have at least one or two inexplicable experiences.
I do. And I would be very happy to share one of those with you.
I would love if you'd share one of those with me.
One of my favorite experiences was, it was during my first year living there. I was sleeping on the couch, not because my bedroom was the most haunted room in the house, which it was actually. It was historically the room that I occupied as my bedroom was called the cold room because it's about 10 to 15 degrees colder than the rest of the house. It's also the room that Mrs. Tiedemann passed away in 1895. This was her bedroom. It's not so much because it was the most haunted room in the house, but mostly because I had trouble falling asleep sometimes, and falling asleep with the television on helps, and the television was in the living room. Also, the couch was very comfortable. So I dozed off on the couch, and in the middle of the night I got up and turned the TV off, and I rolled over. And then I wake up to boom, 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 boom. Somebody running up the stairs. Now, at the time, there was a family, father and son, who were working on the house, doing a lot of the work, and I thought it was his 15-year-old son. They're Amish, so his son was apprenticing under him, and I thought it was Isaiah. I said, okay, I'm, just sitting there. I sit up, I'm rubbing my eyes, and then I hear boom, ba boom, ba boom, boom, boom. Someone running down the stairs and giggling, and I'm like, "Is it bring your whole family to work day or something?" I'm like, what the hell is this? So I get up just to ask Freeman, hey, can you, just ask the kids to keep it down. So I go out into the hallway, and the light turns on in the hall on its own. It's supposed to do that. They're on a motion sensor. Nothing paranormal about that. But then I realized that they're not in the front room, which at the time was the wood shop, and the whole house is dark. And I look down the stairwell. There's nobody there. And I'm like, the hell is this? I go and turn on the light, and I look at my mantel clock above my TV cabinet. It's only about 4:20, 4:30 in the morning. It's really early. And I'm like, okay. And I closed the door and I turned on the TV and ABC World News now, get the coffee going. I said, that's it, I'm up. Not because I was afraid or anything, but because I just had the most wild experience and there was no way I'm going back to sleep after that. So that was quite an experience. So.
How much of your vocation as an investigative historian stems directly from Franklin Castle?
Oh, a lot of it, mostly from the time I started doing the research around 1992 on the house. I started looking into the stories because we had this great book called Haunted Heartland, and that's where I had already known about the Franklin Castle, and it had been written about in a few newspaper articles, and it would be featured on PM Magazine on Channel 8 every once in a while, which was a show that used to be on in the 80s, great show. And somebody wrote a book called Haunted Heartland, and I didn't agree with the title of the chapter, but it was titled House of Evil. It's like, okay. And it gave a great legend of the Franklin Castle and how this couple loved the house so much that they refused to leave, and then it goes into stories of murders and incest and all these early accounts and the paranormal activity. And I wanted to see how much of that was true. And I started, well, as you're supposed to start. Where are they buried? Riverside Cemetery. And went over there and started looking into the burial records and started finding family members that were not mentioned in Haunted Heartland. But one of the legends said that 3 children mysteriously died in 1883 and were all buried on the same day. We went over and we looked at the records, and that part was true. There were 3 children that were all buried on the same day. But I was scratching my head on that because how can this be? Because one of them was 6 months old and one of them was about 9 months old. How could they have 2 children 3 months apart in age? Then I found out they were moved there from Monroe Street Cemetery in 1883. Their dates of death range between 1863 and 1873. Somebody saw this, just simply looked at the date of burial and came up with the story about 3 children all mysteriously dying in 1883 and made the whole thing up. So that's really where a lot of it starts. After that, I need to know more. So I started looking at census records. My mom was my first teacher at any of this. She was our family genealogist and historian for mostly the Mahans. And she showed me how to do cemetery records, how to look up census records. The Western Reserve Historical Society took me down there. It was fantastic and set me on this course to what I'm doing now.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, the locations and lost ghost stories of Cleveland, do you visit any of those during your strange and spooky tours?
Yeah, a number of them. The Downtown Cleveland Ghost Walk does visit many of the sites that do appear in here. Of course, Erie Street Cemetery, share the story of the Erie Street Ghost. The Old Cleveland Medical College, which appears on the front, is located at the southeast corner of St. Clair and East 9th. And that's a terrifying story what happened there, what they found. It's mind-blowing. And when you realize what's still buried on site, send a chill right up your spine. So a lot of these places that we stop at, especially on the Downtown Cleveland Ghost Walk, are places that do appear in the book.
For those who read Lost Ghost Stories and inevitably love it, are there any similar books that you recommend?
Not that share Lost Ghost Stories. I don't think anyone has ever really attempted something like this where they specifically sought out ghost stories that hadn't been reported on in over 100 years. But honestly, if it's Cleveland ghost stories though that you're interested in, yes, read Haunted Cleveland. Read Cleveland Ghosts by Charles Cassidy. Read anything that James A. Willis has written on hauntings up here. You won't be disappointed with anything that they've written. They're very well researched. They're very well written. They're very insightful, and you will, I'd imagine you will love every story that they share.
Wonderful.